Les damos la bienvenida.
Good morning. We welcome you to our second day for the second Methane Summit Latin America and the Caribbean. We would like to greet those who are following us online via our official YouTube channel with simultaneous translation into English. Today we'll begin the day with a highly relevant topic. We'll get to know strategies, funds, and existing mechanisms, funds to mitigate for mitigation measures on methane. For this, we'll invite a representative from the Latin American and Caribbean Development Bank, Henrique Bezerra from the Global Methane Hub, Dominic Watson from the Environmental Defense Fund, and the panel will be moderated by James Garvie from Climate, Clean Air and Water Coalition.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, hopefully you can hear things. You're most welcome to this panel. We're delighted to be here today. Yesterday, the panels and presentations discussed the techniques and the potential regulatory frameworks that can be considered to reduce methane emissions. But how can actions actually be implemented on the ground to really realize these ambitions and structures? They sometimes require initial financial support. This can be targeted or catalytic in nature. This can be focused on initiating programs, for example. It might scale up to then building capacity, and then it might scale up to supporting infrastructure. So how can all of these developments take place? So in terms of financing and scaling up that financing, we're delighted to today to discuss these aspects by our panel, and welcoming again Fernando Branger from CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, Dominic Watson from the Environmental Defense Fund, and Henrique Bezerra from the Global Methane Hub to discuss these issues. They'll be responding in the language of choice, so it's, I apologize, I'm asking the questions in English, but they will be responding according to their preference. And so just to start today, perhaps you can introduce yourselves and the organizations that you represent, and what the organizations offer, and perhaps something just a bit, what you love about your work, what you really enjoy about the role that you have. Dominic, perhaps you can start.
Hi, everybody. My name's Dominic. Apologies, I will be speaking in English. I think it'll be better for everyone, rather than me trying to muddle through in Spanish. But I work for a nonprofit called the Environmental Defense Fund, called EDF, so different than the French utility EDF that you might have heard of. And we're an NGO. We're focused on advancing climate goals and global health goals around the world. We have staff in around 30 to 40 countries around the world, working on a range of environmental issues. Climate change is, of course, the largest one, but including biodiversity, water, fisheries, just a range of topics. And my specific focus is on methane emissions from the oil and gas industry, finding ways that we can decarbonize this industry as quickly as possible. And in particular, finding ways to where it can be most effective for emissions reductions, working directly with companies, or, as we're going to talk about on the panel today, working with the financial sector and trying to find ways to move capital to where it can be really helpful for emissions reductions, which is generally at the project level where emissions reductions happen. So what do I love most about this work? I think in this job, you get to work with some incredibly passionate and impressive people within some of these organizations that are trying to change gargantuan corporations from the inside and have a job related to sustainability, whether it's in a bank, an investment fund, or even a national oil company or one of the IOCs, and trying to slightly move them towards a better future and one that's better for the climate and better for their business as well.
Thank you, Dominic. And Henrique.
Great.
Well, I'm going to talk in Portuñol Spanglish. I would like to first thank Olada for organizing this event. which is a really unique opportunity to join the main stakeholders in the energy sector to discuss such an important topic to our region for combating climate change. And actually, this partnership with Olade has taught us much. For global methane hub, it has been an example to follow in other regions. Thanks to this experience, that is a success and that we are having at Olade, we have extended this kind of partnership with other intergovernment bodies in Asia, in Africa. So it leaves us very happy and proud to be a part of this initiative. And well, the Global Methane Hub is a philanthropic organization that was created 4 years ago, precisely after signing the Global Methane Pledge. This is an opportunity seen from global philanthropy to help the signing countries to the Global Methane Pledge, but not only the signees, but those that are not yet signees, but who still have an ambition to mitigate their methane emissions in the energy, agriculture, and waste sectors. And well, on the second question, what is it that makes me happy or proud about the job that I have? I have 20 years of working in the energy sector in Brazil, Argentina, and other countries, but it is the first time that I am able to be in contact and working along with other relevant actors in the energy sector and organized civil society, the private sector, public decision makers, and that really gives us the opportunity to consider the many perspectives and to work on solutions that indeed will be implementable because they are considering all of the stakeholders involved in the energy sector. So it is a unique opportunity, and I have a master's on energy policy, and it is truly exciting to see that it can be done when one has all of the relevant stakeholders working to achieve a solution. So that's it. Good morning, everyone. And I would also like to thank Olade and especially Gaston and the wonderful team that they have, who has put this initiative underway, which is truly an initiative that will be working to improve the quality of not only the environment, but that gas that we want to be one of low emissions. I am a senior executive at CAF. I have 15 years at CAF now. And CAF is a multilateral bank, which basically has two major areas where it provides loans, both sovereign and non-sovereign. The CAF portfolio is around 80% sovereign, 20% non-sovereign. And when I say sovereign, these are loans with a guarantee from the Republic. Meanwhile, non-sovereign are loans which have none of the Republic's backing, though we could have the private sector or public companies, but which operate as privates. Apart from that, CAF has non-reimbursable technical assistance that are fundamental often. For example, in a Ministry of Energy that precisely intends to build their indicator system, it could request to CAF support to hire some kind of consultancy that helps them to set this up. That is merely an example on technical assistance, though technical assistance covers many aspects, not only under energy, but we also have feasibility issues or water issues or climate change. Apart from that, as a multilateral bank, also very important is the matter of catalyzing funding. Part of what we are doing is fund catalyzation. We seek extra-regional funds Apologies, I didn't say it here. CAF at this time covers 22 countries in the region who are members. They are shareholders of CAF, save for Spain and Portugal from without the region, but the rest is all within the region and growing somewhat now in the Caribbean. So as I said, CAF then also seeks funding catalyzation and seeking out third parties that can come to work with us in the sense of including their resources. We also work with other development agencies. It is typical for us to work with CFW in Germany or AFD in France. So we have a significant offering of products and services for countries and the private sector. Why am I involved in this? For many years, I've been involved with energy. Ever since I was little, it has been a topic that has always been present with me. And when I came to CAF, the issue of solar panels was exotic. I remember that talking to a German, precisely at KfW, I said, but you guys are crazy. Those panels are too expensive. But look how it's changed. Today, nobody's saying that it's crazy to set up solar panels. So this is fascinating for me, this change that is happening before us, where we can contribute to that. I believe that this possibility that we have to reduce methane gas, which is something that indeed we can see, as was said yesterday, is a unique opportunity, and we need to push along that line. So
Thank you very much. Things. In terms of looking specifically into Latin America and the Caribbean, perhaps Henrique, you can start in terms of experience that you've seen. What lessons can be drawn from the support that you've provided so far in the region?
Bien. Yo creo.
well, I believe it would be interesting to discuss very quickly about how the global methane hub, what is its strategy in order to leverage investment and funding for mitigation. I will discuss specifically Latin America, but first, we understand that there needs to be research of the state-of-the-art of funding for methane mitigation. So we began with research made by the Climate Policy Institute to determine how much of climate funding was going to methane mitigation. And that report was published last year. What was found was that 1.3 trillions of dollars, I never know how to say the figures in Spanish, apologies. Only 1% was going to methane mitigation. When we saw that methane is responsible at least for 1/3, according to some metrics, for 45% of global warming net, according to the latest IPCC report, then first that assessment was made and clearly there was a huge gap. Later, based on that, we made the effort and we are doing it along with the Climate Bonds Initiative for categorizing and understanding. Well, here there's an opportunity and albeit huge, how can we tell the community and investors, both public and private, how to invest properly on methane mitigation? We are sure that those resources will go to methane mitigation in all three sectors that emit it. So this is an effort that was made globally, but now it is being worked together with ministries of treasury around Latin America, such as with Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and others. And this is about to be published. Some is already put under public consultation, as with Brazil. Then we also work with the private sector, and Dominic will talk more to that, as he's our partner at ADF, to try to unblock private investment via bonds or different mechanisms, because it's also understood that many investors who have a green finance on or sustainability intent. They miss out from investing on oil and gas because they believe that anything with oil and gas is not aligned with the Paris targets, so it cannot be classified as green, and that is a huge mistake because if one invests specifically on methane mitigation, it is pretty green and aligned. So the work that we also did and are doing, looking to the private funding sector, and then working with MDVs. Typically, MDBs, we are supporting the World Bank at the World Flaring Methane Reduction Partnership, which is a fund that we do not contribute directly to with funding, but we support its formation, and the World Bank already has projects. Yesterday, I came to know that it has projects in Brazil already, and I know also in Mexico and other countries in the region to support them, to first by giving investment at a lost fund, but for this to be conditioned with more resources from the private sector to mitigate the mitigations around the world, but specifically in Latin America as well. And lastly, and here, due to time constraints, I won't discuss many things, but the work that pertains to regulation, which is the foundation for funding to arrive to those practices and policies, and that is having clear regulations. Regulations that will set up economic incentives for mitigation, such as carbon markets, or, well, different mechanisms that will reward mitigation, but also will create cost for non-action. And, well, the effort that CCAC that you are working on is a clear example on the importance of regulation to reward good actions and to bring costs to non-action, which will unblock funding. And not to leave you without an answer, I believe that an example of an effort that is just beginning with Cleaner Task Force that will look often when we present these figures on how methane mitigation in the oil and gas sector is cost effective, because it is. Often when these graphs are shown by pointing to the negative cost of mitigation to operators who are in Euken, in Campeche, or wherever it is in the region, oh, but these figures don't apply to Argentina. They don't apply to Mexico or Brazil. Because here the capital cost is higher, because here these technologies are not available, or they are available at a higher cost. So what we're doing, just starting with Clean Air Task Force, is an assessment of the cost of the local economic costs and benefits on how much indeed does it cost to mitigate, and to show the local sector that this does has a significant return. So it is an example that I wanted to give to you.
Fernando, from your perspective, from a development bank perspective, what role is the development bank playing, and from your experience, what lessons, can be drawn from the support that you have provided?
Sure.
Let's see, as I was saying, as a development bank, CAF has this possibility to provide sovereign funds with sovereign guarantees or support to countries and private non-sovereign parties and companies that are of state property, that operate as private companies. But there's an important part here, and it is this matter of technical assistance. And here we have a role. For instance, this report on that is linked to the observatory on how is the roadmap for setting all of this up, all of those KPIs for methane reduction. This stems from a technical cooperation from CAF to OLADE, which allows to perform this research and allows to present this research, of course, to all stakeholders. As I said, any country can request non-reimbursable funds to work on the framework, be it regulatory or actually roadmaps. For instance, we have worked on many roadmaps, not for methane, but for instance, we have gotten into hydrogen at one point, or planning by 2050 for the energy sector. That goes along with support on non-reimbursable technical assistance. Now, regarding loans per se, I want to tell you that precisely less than a month ago, the CAF board passed a loan for $500 million for a company here in Peru, which is Calida, that you surely know. This loan is an AB loan, and this loan, I would say, is the beginning of what we will continue doing on matters of gas. CAF is one of the few development banks, as was said by our director yesterday, of the few development banks who are funding gas projects. And we understand that, well, we get into gas, but we should seek for that gas to be low emissions. So that's why we got involved with the Methane Observatory. And that's why in this 500 million AB loan, CAF is the arranger, and there are other private banks getting onto this loan. We are including some KPIs where basically the company is asked to keep a rating according to an ESG, and with a level of CO2 that cannot turn around and improving. It must improve. This is the beginning for what I would say the standard, and we're precisely in that transition of including these indicators on loans. One advantage, and I believe this is something that could be proposed, an advantage we had with this company is that they had already established a baseline that immediately you could establish comparisons. So there is a baseline effort that we need to begin there in order to be able to establish how much is it that we are indeed going to be reducing. As I said, this is the first loan that we have under those conditions. Before this loan, Calida, we had a loan also with works linked to the gas pipeline that is no longer called Ernesto Kirchner, is called Benito Moreno. So there, and also for $500 million. And so we will continue. Gas is very important to the region. The decision is from the CF board. Not only is it important in terms of energy and improving the quality of life of our citizens, but also in many cases, it is the opportunity that countries have to obtain significant fiscal income or to resolve balance issues, pay balance issues. This is something that we cannot leave behind, or that we cannot ignore, which is why the board decides to go for gas issues, but under that condition. Let's seek for that gas to be low emissions. And in that sense, we will continue supporting.
Dominic, perhaps for you, a couple of questions. The first of which is, how do you bring the private financial sector into this discussion? And what do you feel they can offer?
Well, I would argue that there's an enormous role for the private sector to play here. And so I'm very glad Henrique brought up this climate finance gap that we're seeing in methane emissions. It's a gap we're seeing across the climate issues, where there's just a need for funding that isn't being met. But specifically for methane emissions, I know you all have heard a lot of numbers over the past day or so, but let me just give you a few more to kind of quantify a bit of what we're talking about in terms of the need for capital on methane emissions that we need to see. So according to our colleagues at the IEA, as well as McKinsey, we need to spend about 175 to 200 billion by 2030 if we're to hit the targets that the oil and gas industry has set for itself, as well as global targets for methane emissions reductions that would keep us within punching distance of 1.5 or 2 degrees. So that comes out to 175 to 200 billion over 5 years is, let's call it 30 to 40 billion dollars a year spending, which sounds like a very, very large number, and of course it is, but if in context, within the whole oil and gas industry, that's about less than 1% of net income globally. So a small number relative to the amount of number flowing around, but nonetheless a number that needs to be met urgently. So that's on the spending side of the equation, how much we need to put on methane emissions abatement. And on the other side of the equation, the question is, how much are we spending now? That number is a lot harder to find, but from what is available publicly, so for example, from the work that the Climate Policy Initiative has done, thanks to the Global Methane Hub, what we found in terms of numbers is that number is much, much lower. It's in the millions instead of the billions. So there's really a big gap in terms of spending. And the question from there is, how on earth are we going to get $200 billion worth of capital towards methane emissions projects over the next 5 years? And so I would argue that there's maybe the best way to leverage this, to leverage, or the best path to leverage and the fastest way to get capital flowing is from the capital markets. And this is a well-trodden path that's been done by a number of other sectors for decarbonization. And particularly what I'm talking about is sustainable debt markets and green bond markets. And these are markets that the power sector, for example, has leveraged at scale to be able to decarbonize their own operations, in particular by deploying renewables, where they'll issue what's called labeled debt, specifically for emissions reductions projects. And just last year, this market reached a total size of 6 trillion in capital in terms of issuances. So that's cumulative. For reference, all of the current outstanding debt from the oil and gas industry is just above 3 trillion. So an enormous capital pool that we could tap, and one that could be fit for purpose for decarbonization for the oil and gas industry. So this is why over the past year and a half, the Environmental Defense Fund, so supported by the Global Methane Hub and in partnership with a number of other organizations, has been working to develop a guidance document that could be leveraged by whether it's countries, so sovereigns or national oil companies, to be able to tap these markets and to be able to access capital from private markets for methane emissions reductions. I'm very shamelessly going to give you the website because that's going to have much more than what I can tell you now, but it's methanefinance.org. And the group, the initiative was called the Methane Finance Working Group. And what we produced and published in June is this first guidance document. So the initiative was launched at COP28, right at the time when the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter was signed in Dubai, with the idea that we were seeing, quite laudably, a number of national oil companies around the world committing to methane emissions reductions for the first time. But there was a clear need for capital to be able to go out and meet these targets. So committing to a target doesn't mean, of course, that the emissions are going to be reduced. That happens when you put the infrastructure in the ground, when you make the changes needed in order to be able to reduce real emissions. And that requires a number of things, one of which is capital expenditures and operational expenditures. I'll just close by saying that this is a really broadly supportive initiative. There is a whole lot of capital out there that's really wants to put funding towards methane emissions. Some of the major supporters have been global banks, including Standard Chartered, Bank of America. We have some of the largest investors in the world who've been backing this initiative. So PIMCO, which is a California-based investor and is the largest fixed income investor in the world, as well as Amundi, the largest asset manager in Europe, Allianz, the largest insurer in the world. Just really, really large pools of capital here that are looking to deploy it at scale for methane emissions reductions.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And I can heartily endorse the report that the working group has prepared. It is an excellent resource. for those interested in accessing the bond markets and others. Dominic, just following on from the discussion there, in terms of ensuring those investments are methane specific, are there elements that can be included in the arrangements that make sure that those are delivered with a methane focus?
Yeah, I'll try not to bore you all with the details, but I'll give you maybe just a little taste of the structures that come in the guidance, and maybe that can spring some ideas for how it might be used at the government level or maybe at the corporate level. But essentially, what we did is we looked at instruments or structures that have had the proven ability to scale in these green bond markets in other sectors. And so those are two types of instruments. The first is what you might have heard of as a green bond, and the second is what you might have heard of as a sustainability-linked bond. So a green bond is rather simple in some ways, where you raise a set amount of capital, you raise a set amount of money, and that capital is meant to be used for a certain set of green emissions abatement activities, however you define it. In the past, it's previously been for, say, renewable deployment. You can only spend this money if you're a utility on renewables. You can't spend it on a new coal-fired power plant. That's how you'd get more money, possibly at a preferential interest rate, so at a cheaper cost of debt towards renewables. What we've done is try and adapt that concept for decarbonization. So trying to define what are the activities that you could use for methane emissions abatement. Could it be for your pneumatics? Could you spend it on vapor recovery units, LDAR? Whatever it is the right solution for a company, what are the possible emissions abatement activities you could raise money for and spend it on? The second one is a little more complicated. So it goes by sustainability-linked bond is the typical name. In our framework, we called it a KPI-linked framework, where either a government or a company would raise, so general purpose capital. They could be spent across the company. They would raise debt just in the same way that they might raise debt that they typically do and are typically doing. But this time, when they raise the debt, it would come with a set of conditions or a set of targets, a set of, so KPIs is the technical terms, key performance indicators, that would mean that the company has to disclose and meet a certain set of targets. So methane intensity, meet a certain methane intensity by X year, meet a certain flaring intensity, put in place a leak detection and repair program, replace your pneumatics, et cetera. Whatever. Again, with all of this, we've really tried to make it flexible and to meet operators where they're at and to have a system that anyone can start along the path but come to an ultimate end goal that is where we all should be, which is near zero methane emissions. So those are the two frameworks and kind of a little more specificity around them.
Fantastic, thank you, Dominic. And as we start to move towards a close on this session, as has been highlighted, that there's a clear need for financing, but there's a delay in the uptake of that financing or getting access to the finance. Perhaps, Fernando, you could reflect on how we can perhaps reduce that delay, if there is a delay or uptake, or remove a barrier to the uptake. And if you had any last key messages that you think are appropriate for the audience.
Seguro. A ver, este tema de metano.
Yes, this methane subject is something that's starting to be in the radar. This is not something that we have historically dealt with. So on one hand, we need to find what are the financial tools that can actually help us in order to reduce methane emissions, such as many examples that were mentioned. CAF has been issuing green bonds or blue bonds, and we are having a initial loan to Peru, by the way. But this is related to legislation, to real capabilities, and something that is fundamental, and actually we have been discussing yesterday in the afternoon, is related to the indicators. We need to have an indicator set, indicators that could be reliable, transparent. This should be used in any country. and everybody should be able to recognize them. If we don't have a set of indicators that we can agree upon, it is very hard that we would achieve financing with some particular conditions. I believe that from the get-go, we need to understand that a set of indicators that we can agree upon when it comes to methane reductions is what we need. And then we have incorporation of private banking. This goes along with the multilateral actions, but there's a debate that has been going on around in which everything related to oil and gas is not green, for example. And this became like a frowned upon word or forbidden word, oil and gas. And I think that this extended the discussion for too long. And this is related to the debates that happen in the Congress. We need to separate the ideological concepts with what the technology provides and financial aspects. I took a course about a week ago, and Dr. Robert Stantz was mentioning was that on the contrary to what it was mentioned, this was energy and environment course. He was mentioning that something that was really loud was oil and gas in order to move forward with climate change. And this became a red tag for the Democrats, right? Because the Republicans were not even touching it. But once the other political party started talking about this, we started having a battle, right? Political problems. And part of what's happening in the world is related to think on what we have, sitting and looking at a reality. There were some statements from the Germany chancellor. He was saying that we need to work without thinking about political parties. So we need to move forward. Latin America actually has oil and gas companies which are extremely relevant. We have them in Colombia, we have them in Venezuela as well, in Trinidad. And I think that these companies, without waiting for any type of legislation, they can start with the work on methane emissions, because 50% of such emissions come from oil and gas national corporations. And I think that we have a reality and an encouragement from each of these companies in the oil and gas sector where they could be the first one, and then they could be an example for the rest of the companies.
And Henrique, from your perspective, are there any final statements you would like to leave with the audience from the Global Methane Hub?
Sí, claro. Mira, yo creo que
Yes, I believe that this is a valuable summit because this shows that the solutions that we have right now. It is true that this is a new subject, by the way, but we have made a lot of progress over the last years. So the transparency for economical benefits, investors, policies that are required to leverage these investments to mitigate methane emissions, the impact of methane emissions in the climate, in the weather, in health, it's clear. So I think that given all the conditions, I believe that we can increase such implementation aligned with the commitments that we already had. And for me, this makes me quite optimistic, but I think this is rooted in reality because my colleagues from AAE yesterday, they mentioned that even if we have the conditions, emissions are continuing or growing. And we only have 4 years to reduce this in 75% in order to be aligned with our pledges. It's important to understand the size of the challenges, yes, but it's important to understand that we have financial, private mechanisms. We have NDBs, we have MDBs, we have policies that are effective from government. So we have gone from the pilot phase already, but many of the things that we're discussing here had already shown impact and results that is quite clear. So the final message for me or for you guys would be for the decision makers in the private sector. Taking decision is right now. We have the conditions to reach our pledges or the agreements that we have signed. And let's hope that in the next summit, we could show numbers that we're moving forward with the implementation of such commitment.
Dominic, a last word perhaps from yourselves to draw the session to a close.
Sure. I think if there's one thing that financing has a role to play here is it's in helping to align incentives. If we don't align incentives appropriately at the government level, at the corporate level, we're not going to see action. Commitments alone aren't going to get us to the goals that we need to see. And so bringing development, bank capital, private capital, capital from offsets, whatever the sources of capital are that can help cheapen the costs of debt, cheapen the costs of mitigation, if those can come and help make equations work, put certain projects that would be in the red and the black, make the opportunity cost lower for certain companies, I think that's going to be what's going to help us move towards real emissions reductions on the ground rather than just these targets that are laudable, these commitments that are laudable and towards real action.
Thank you, Dominic. I think the discussion has provided hugely insightful information on the need for financing, the types of financing that are available, what information is needed to support the finance, and how it can be delivered to make sure that it's specifically targeting methane reduction according to the commitments and the objectives that the loan or finance is driving towards. I'm just conscious of time. I don't know if there's opportunity for questions, but please do approach the panelists. I'm sure they'll be delighted to answer any questions you have outside the panel. We just wanted to reiterate again our thanks to Aladi for the arranging this event and the opportunity for this discussion, and would be grateful if you can show your appreciation for the panelists for their very insightful advice and recommendations. So thank you.